This year marks the 20th anniversary of the horrific events of 9/11. There in New York City, where the Twin Towers once stood, it was aptly named Ground Zero. It's where the events happen. Marriages have been referred to as Ground Zero, for the devil has fought long and hard from the beginning of time there in the garden, every marriage in existence. We're delighted to have Pastor Butch Heath as our guest today on Crucial Conversations. He's going to give us some pointers and some insights in how we can avoid some catastrophes in our marriages in the realm of communication. Stay tuned. You'll be glad you did. It's good to have you here, Pastor Heath. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and be with us. If I understand correctly, you are in your 16th year of crisis family care.
Correct.
And then before that, if I understand correctly, 13 years of director of family life right here, pastor of family life right here at Hobe Bible Church. And these many years later, I still hear some very, very positive things of how your ministry impacted so many. And I appreciate your emphasis on family and still doing it today. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here with you.
It seems like from the very beginning, family's been under attack. Even back in Genesis, it just seemed like the devil was trying to wreak havoc between Adam and Eve, and we see what happened there, and the divisiveness that was there. And then here we are, still watching the devil just have a heyday with families. In the church, without the church, in our communities, everywhere around us. You don't have to go very far. You don't have to listen very long until you begin to pick up little hints, family problems. And as I've done just a little bit of reading and research myself leading up to this, but books that I've read even for my own marriage, my wife and I, it seems like there seems to be a common thread that traces back to one specific problem, and that is communication. It seems like everything can be traced back to the lack of communication or a sorry attempt of communication, perhaps we could say. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've thought about it a long time, and I remember many years ago when I was working on a degree and I was taking a course in counseling, and the professor said, top 3 problems in a marriage are finance, physical, and in-laws. And I thought, well, that's true. And as I've gone through working with couples, it is true. But then since I've been with Crisis Family Care, and we have a website where people will go in and fill out a confidential counseling form to send in to us, I've noticed as it comes back with its message of their concerns and issues that right near the top is communication. Along with that is also anger and other things, but in communication is probably the number one. And as I thought about it, well, it makes sense. You know, you've got problems with your physical issues, you've got problems with your financial issues, you've got problems with your in-laws. It could be that we're not properly talking about it, communicating together, sharing the issues and working through it, so we lack the communication.
Communication is a pretty broad word. And I mean, we could talk about this for probably 5 or 6 hours and still not get off of the very word communication. But do you happen to have some things or some tips, some helps that can strengthen that communication? Because, you know, I think I'm a great communicator, and my wife assures me that I'm not. And you know, how can I strengthen my communication with my wife?
Well, I do have some ways that I share with couples when I'm talking with them in person or on the phone or Skype or wherever. And I've entitled it the 8 Steps to Overcome Communication Issues. Very practical. Let me give them to you real quick. Number 1 is to love your companion with all of your heart. And the reason I start there, because if we don't love them, obviously we're not going to communicate with them. And I strongly believe in a marriage that communication in a marriage is like blood in the body. When you lose the communication, you lose the life in the marriage. Same way with the blood in the body. So to start with, if I don't love my companion with all of my heart, then something's going to be wrong with my relationship and my communication. And it's so important to realize, because love is not just something I say, and we should say it. Matter of fact, we should verbalize it often. I'm still working on that, and I'm still doing research on that. I've found another list that I want to use for a certain part of it. But it's important not just to say it, but to do it, because love is an action word. If I love my wife, then I should show it. And if I show it, she should know it and understand it. And it tells her and confirms to her that I don't just say I love you, but by my actions, I prove that I love you.
Communication, if it begins with loving with all of your heart, how does that look? How does communication and loving your spouse with all your heart, how does that gel?
Well, it actually kind of continues on in the list, if I could do that. The second thought is to learn to let things go. Now, that's a hard one. But the Bible tells us in Philippians chapter 3, verse 13, it says, "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind." And I have experienced, I have taught, I have seen the results where if you could, and I'm not talking about major things, like major problems, but the things that where you're talking with a couple and they've had an issue, and you say, "Well, tell me about your issue. Tell me about the blow up." And they say, "I can't remember." And it's like sad. How can you have this marital issue and you can't even remember what it was about? So when I talk about letting it go, I'm talking about little insignificant things, yet at the moment were very difficult for you to handle. So it's like letting that go, because in the light of love, in the light of eternity, they're not that important.
So communication, in essence, trying to bring this in, is saying that I am the sender trying to get you, the listener, to understand what I'm saying. And so communicating with you and trying to talk about the issue at hand is hampered if I continue to bring up those little things from the past we can't really deal with. And I think that happens a lot in marriages. We can't really deal with the issue at hand because we're too busy not letting go. You've probably found that to be true.
I found that true this morning when I was talking to a couple on the phone, and it just came up glaring at me that there are things that really have bothered her, have bothered him, and it just like renewed that we haven't dealt with this part of the issue of communication. For instance, she talks to him late at night and he falls asleep, and she thinks that he doesn't really care to hear what she says. And he says, no, it's not just that. And he does fall asleep like most men do. We men lay our heads down, we close our eyes, and we go to sleep, where not every woman does it quite the way the man does it. But when I found out today, there are times he doesn't want to talk to her about things because they're nitpicky things and little things that she should probably let go. Another thing, let me add this one too. This kind of goes right along. They kind of build on each other. Is not only let things go, but give up your rights and work together for a win-win situation. Now, see, that's a big thing as well, because most of us red-blooded Americans want to be right, correct?
Sure.
Do you like being right?
Yeah, I do. I most certainly am.
And I've noticed you're humble too, because when you're right all the time, you're probably, anyway, so when you give up your rights and work together so that, so to speak, when you're at the table of life and you both leave, you both take something with you because you both win. It's a win-win. Marriage should be a win-win situation where so often it's not. One or the other wins, they think, and they leave the table of life and of marriage, but they both lose. So it's learning to give up your rights to work together and realize that we're one. Two people, but in marriage we're one. And if we really want to be able to communicate, we can let those things go. We can love each other. We can forget the things that are behind. But we can also give up what we think are our rights, because I should be able, you said this, now let me, and just say, honey, I'm sorry. These are three things that I try to give every couple I talk to. And I probably should go ahead and give it to you. And this is something you could use this Sunday afternoons after you preach. and you make certain remarks about your wife. Here are the three things. Number one is, honey, I am sorry. You got to mean it though. Number two is, I was wrong. And number three, will you please forgive me? Now, when you do that, it changes the course of action.
How is that applied in the middle of a conversation that has maybe already got beyond that point of happening at that moment?
You mean as far as saying I'm sorry?
Right. I mean, you're in the middle of a conversation, and point number 3 or 4 that you're talking about, this one is fighting for the rights, this one's fighting for the rights. Somewhere along the line, there's got to be a point where we just stop. Because if not, there's going to be a whole lot more, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I'm wrong.
Let me go back 1 second or so, and that is when I talk to a couple, especially new couples, I say, listen, I'm a pastoral counselor. I believe in the power of prayer. Would you mind if I begin our session with prayer? And I try to do that every time, pray with them and pray at the end of our session, because I realize, and I tell them this, I said, I can't help you if I don't have God's help, and you need God's help. And so that's something that's very, very important. And back to your question, in the midst of these heated discussions in your communication gaps, when this is happening, my concern, my prayer, my emphasis in trying to teach this is that it will dawn on you, whoa, look what's happening. So one of you step up to the plate, raise your hand, say, wait, honey, this isn't really, really good. I want to tell you something. I'm sorry for where this is going. I'm wrong for making a mountain out of this molehill. Will you please forgive me? And one of the reasons I share this in this whole communication encouragement thing is that there are some people, you probably don't know this, that don't know how to say, I am sorry. Or, everybody else around them knows that, but they don't know that.
Right.
So it's a good practice to say, hey, I'm sorry. And we try to teach this to our children. Sorry. No, that doesn't cut it. I am sorry. I was wrong. Will you please forgive me? It'll stop it abruptly. But it's kind of like, and this is a corny illustration, sorry about it. But I talk to people, and you can really tell where people live if they understand it. But if you ever driven through a small town in a residential section, and you're driving, all of a sudden this dog comes running out and starts barking at you as he runs alongside the car, and all of a sudden you get to a stop sign, you stop, what does the dog do? Please answer it correctly. The dog barks one more time, and
I'm sorry,
he stops.
I wasn't listening. Communication here is not joking.
He stops barking, and he walks away. It's a corny illustration, but when one of you wise up and say, you know what, hey, I'm sorry, the dog stops barking. I'm not calling which one's the dog, but the fight stops. All of a sudden, it's like, whoa, well, if you're sorry, I'm sorry. Honey, will you free? And now we're back instead of fighting. Now we're hugging, maybe crying, and we start all over and rebuilding the peace that we want in our marriage.
I like what you called communication gaps, because probably at that point in time, all communication is, it's an argument, it's not a communication. And gaps, I like that. What do you got next?
The next one is to don't create expectations for each other. See, a lot of times we think, well, I'm expecting my wife to do that, or you're expecting your wife, or my wife's husband, me. And in other words, there's certain things that we expect them to do. Whereas, and I'm not talking about just wrong things or just right things, it could be anything. And what happens is, if we have these expectations, then our relationship starts to experience the self-centeredness. That marriage is all about me. I expect my wife to cook. I expect my wife to do the dishes. I expect my wife to clean my clothes. I expect my wife to make the bed before 10 o'clock at night, because in my selfish mode, I hate going upstairs, and she cleaned the sheets, but hasn't got around to making the. See, those are expectations that we should wipe away. I should say, honey, can I help you make the bed? Now, don't ask her if I do that, but that's what I need to do. Expectations, and it's difficult because we don't think alike, we don't understand each other, and what you expect of her may have never even got into her mind what she expects of you, so we do things ourselves. I remember Gary Chapman, you may not have heard of him, he used to do marriage seminars. We've been to 2 of them, and I remember him telling a story about, I'll say this real quick, his wife had a great habit of leaving the drawers open and the doors open. He would get on to her and he would discuss it, and it was a source of contention. One day he came home, walked into the kitchen, true to her nature, the drawers are open, the doors are open, looked at his watch, and began shutting the doors and the drawers, and a few seconds later, they were shut. He overcame his expectation for her by doing it for her.
So that's going to, for that to be applicable to us, we have to change the way we think a little bit.
Which leads right into the next point, and that is to be willing to make personal changes. You're probably a lot closer than I am, but nobody's perfect. And when I'm not willing to make changes, it's probably because I think I am perfect. But the more I look in the mirror and the more I talk with my wife and the more I talk to other people and the more I talk to I'm not perfect. And since I'm not perfect and I accept that fact, then it's easier for me to change than to think I am perfect. But every one of us, and we've been married over 47 years, and I like to just testify, I have a great marriage, I have a great wife, great partner, great friend, great companion, and I'm still, not her, I am still working on making the needed changes. But God helps me.
And most of those go back to the root of self-centeredness. My preference,
even if it's not from a self-centered carnal heart, it's still from a self-centered, this is how I like it, this is what I want, and yet what we need to do is to give up our rights, to make the personal changes, and then let our companions know, I'm doing this for you.
In communication, there's a lot of disagreements. And I think one of your points deals with that. We never are going to see eye to eye on everything. And sometimes I've always had this idea that, man, this perfect marriage is, communication is when we're on the same page and we're walking away saying, we agree. But I have found that there are times that we are in agreement, but yet we still disagree. But the getting to that point sometimes is not always easy.
I think, and that goes with my next point, and that is we have to practice understanding and accepting our differences. We're not alike. I tell this to a lot of couples, and that is men and women do not think alike. Now, I am not discrediting the way a woman thinks. They think differently than us men. Would you agree? Would you say
yes.
A hearty amen?
I'd say a very hearty amen.
Let me ask you another
Right.
question. Would you personally want to start thinking like your wife?
No.
I don't want to think like my wife. Now, I don't think my wife will ever think like I think. And I might say, I'm saying that with a little tongue in cheek. But because of that, because of we are different, she's a female, I'm a male, we think differently. What we have to do, and this is something that you should learn in your premarital counseling, is you're to become a student of your companion. Learn what makes them tick, what makes them talk, learn what makes them get motivated, learn what makes them happy. And so when you do that, you'll begin to understand how something you do for them would not necessarily be something you want them to do for you. But when you understand that and realize, it's kind of like when I do seminars and bring this up, it's like almost a freeing spirit for men. That, wow, she's allowed to think differently. She's not bad because she doesn't think like me, and I'm not terrible because I don't think like her. But it's something that we learn very quickly and realize because we're different, that's the way God made us. Let me go back to the thought about why is someone getting a divorce? Well, we're not compatible. And I want to say, really? Did you know nobody is compatible when they marry? You come from different backgrounds, different homes, different parts of the country, different nations, you learn to overcome the differences and you work on becoming compatibility. So when I accept that and work on that it makes all the difference in realizing she can be different. Honey, let me be different. We think differently, but accept that fact. And when we do that, it makes a world of difference in our ability to communicate and overcome those issues. Because I want her to think like me at times, and then I have to pull back. No. She's thinking, I need to want to understand why she's thinking the way she's thinking. It is a very freeing feeling when you realize that and you don't try to squeeze her into your mold.
You said there were 8 different points. What's your 8th point?
My 8th one is to take time to pray together. Started off loving each other. We end up praying, not because prayer is least significant. Actually, it's probably the most significant. But it's one to kind of put a cap on it, that a couple that is going to be communicating, is going to be practicing these steps, will be a couple that prays together, talks together. You pray for each other. You pray together. You pray in a way that God's protection's upon them. So prayer, putting into your family relationship, private, together, with your family, prayer, because prayer makes a difference.
That's great stuff, and I appreciate the emphasis on the personal. It's not only the person over there that needs to change, but it's communication happens when I get a better grasp of it as well. Communication happens when we learn to listen better, hear better. There's a difference between hearing and listening, and I'll probably shock everybody to say that I hear a whole lot better than I listen. And my wife wanted me to share that here in this session because she wants you to help me to hear better. And so what is the difference when we're communicating? If I'm going to communicate with you, you communicate with me, I have to hear what you're saying, not just listen. I need to listen to what you're saying, not just hear what you're saying. So what's the difference between the two? If you would share there, it seems to be one is more passive, one is more active. So how does that look in my life? Is there some things I can do to improve my hearing, my listening?
Yes, and I'm still working on it myself. And that is, it's one thing to hear because someone is speaking and your ears are uncovered and you're hearing it. That's kind of a passive approach. Listening, though, is when I am hearing and I choose then to become more active. And I like people, I don't even like to talk to people with sunglasses on. That's a little personal issue, but I want to see your eyes so I know you're hearing what I'm saying. Same way with your companion. Look at your wife and listen to what she says. Don't just hear it while you're looking at your computer or reading the book or doing something else. You are listening, which means you are purposely focusing on what in your case, your wife is telling you. But to really prove that, because you still could be looking and thinking about something else, to really prove that is to be able to listen to what your companion is saying, and you're not trying to come up with a response, rebuttal, argument, or whatever halfway through. Because a lot of times we men, with our great intelligence and everything, a woman can start out with a sentence. We can say, honey, why don't you stop? Let me finish it for you, which that's not true always. But a lot of times a man will start hearing, then start listening, then he goes back to hearing because now he's working on the rebuttal that he's going to give back to her and an answer to give to her because he's already working on it. And so you quit listening and you started hearing so that you could then make the response.
So 2 things happen there probably. One of them, she already begins to say, this is not going to work because he's not listening to me, so therefore she's not feeling like she is being heard. And secondly, in that whole concept of listening all the way through, I miss a lot of things that she's really trying to say because I don't listen to the conclusion of, a lot of times that happens when I preach. A lot of people don't get what I'm really trying to say because they've checked out, before my conclusion is there. But no, in all seriousness, you don't feel like you hear me, or I don't feel like I hear you if I'm not hearing your full thing. So defensive defending what I'm saying to you or whatever it may be is something that is very, very damaging to communication.
One part of that, too, let me give you another thought, and that is as you're listening with your ears, with your mind, and with your heart, you're listening to what she's saying, and you're doing that and accepting it. You may not agree with it, but you're accepting it without passing judgment upon it because it's your wife or your husband saying it to you. Now, that's major, because if halfway through listening I disagree, and now I'm going to think about, no, let me tell you why you're wrong before she's even through telling me what she's saying, then I checked out from the listening back to the hearing, because now I'm working on my judgment response for what you said. Now, I know these are big words, but it's true. A lot of men will hear, and you made a good point there, but they're not listening. They've already snapped into the response mode, and she's not even through talking, and we're working on our judgment.
Thank you for joining us for the first part of a two-part series with Pastor Butch Heath on marriage. If you would have any further questions, if you would like to set up an appointment for counseling, if you would like to talk with him on any issue concerning marriage, his phone number and email is provided for you there on the screen. Maybe you would have some questions that you would like to have addressed right here on Crucial Conversations about Marriage with Pastor Butch Heath. If so, please send those questions to Pastor Butch Heath at the email provided. We will do our best to look at those in the future. Join us next month for part 2 of this two-part series with Pastor Butch Heath on Crucial Conversation. We'll see you then.